Good morning, everybody. Hope you all are doing well today. I do want to mention a couple things before we get started on Chapter 4 of Woodward and Denton, as I'm going to talk about that today. Do remember that your reflection papers are going to be due upcoming this week by Friday at 11:59 p.m. The link is on the As You Learn, so you just turn in your assignment that way. It will allow for multiple files to be recorded. However, I only think you need one, but if you have one and then another page for like a reference section, that's fine too. Or if you want to post some of your articles, you can. It's not required so long as you cite them. So, make sure that you turn that in on Friday. There is going to be no discussion board. However, I am going to look over the discussion board post. I've only read a few of them thus far. It's been kind of a busy weekend. But like I said, I'll look into those this week, preferably by either Tuesday or Thursday, and submit a grade to that. It's really just participation at that point. As long as you're doing them, I'm really pretty happy with just reading through and maybe responding to a couple in that sense. So that's the first thing. So that's Friday. Next week, I'll just go ahead and dive into this. Is going to be Denton and Woodward. Or Woodward and Denton, Chapter 5, and then it's going to be Cialdini, Chapter 6. I will mention, just as kind of a note, that this week I'll be doing 3 lectures. The first one will be on the ideology of reasoning from Woodward and Denton, and then I'm going to get into reciprocity excuse me, phone went off. I'm going to get into reciprocity from Cialdini. This is going to be a little bit different in that they don't match as much as I would have liked them to, but that's kind of for the greater evil or greater good of things. Greater evil, wow. Greater good of things, because the rest of them will match up a lot better. So bear with me on that. And I'm also going to be talking a little bit about persuasion knowledge model. A lot of these are going to be known for persuasive attempts when you already know something. So not only persuasion knowledge model, but even a little bit of reciprocity goes into this aspect of I absolutely know what you're doing, but it still can resonate in some regard. And so, like I said, I'm going to talk about those particular things. So reciprocity is going to be talked about on Tuesday, and then Theory Thursday will be persuasion knowledge model. If you want to look on Wikipedia or anything like that, go on to EBSCOhost to check those sites out, please do. So to start off today, we're talking a lot about reasoning, and I've always liked the concept of reasoning and what it means. And a lot of this does date back to what Aristotle and Plato had talked about in terms of the art of rhetoric, and where Plato obviously was somewhat upset at the ideology of rhetoric because in speech and persuasion, because it wasn't seen as an art form. And I see this a lot now. When I was teaching for the first time, I think I had a little twinkle in my eye when it came to Aristotle because, he's a very optimistic person when it comes to rhetoric in a lot of cases. And, I tended to agree with him because he was so involved with the formation of rhetoric. You have the canons of rhetoric, for example, is a major component from Aristotle in our field that we use quite frequently when it comes to public speaking. But I've seen on countless times that websites or Facebook or any type of social media, or if I go on to watch like the Today Show or something, that there are definitive and conclusive evidence from a study or an expert. And it's rarely the people studying that are using these words. It's just the people with the megaphone that are making these claims. And so, what was it? One of them I found that talked about the aspect of eating chocolate makes, the quality of your life better, or you live longer. I can't remember what it was, but it was this correlation that it was basically you eat chocolate, you live better, or you eat chocolate and you may lose weight or something like that. To which the scholars of this particular study, I can't remember what the dependent variable in this is in this case, but the scholars in the study said, hold on, wait a minute, that's not really what we said. There were correlations between the two, but we can't really say conclusively that, if you eat chocolate, you're going to lose weight. And it just doesn't work like that. They're variables that need to be taken into account that you're not addressing, that the study actually talks about. But that doesn't sell. Much of science, when we look into the notion of what it means to be an educator or a researcher, it's hard for us sometimes because we see the nature of science at least as objectively as we can. It's hard not to be somewhat subjective because why did we pick the subject in the first place? And it's very difficult to be completely objective. That being said, we rarely use the word definitive because we want to be objective. We rarely make definitive claims or claim causality because causality is very, very hard to prove because there's so many different things that can lead us from A to B in this case. And so science is often flawed and it's riddled with mistakes, and that's where it thrives. It's in its argumentation, the idea generation, the constant need for update and correction. And this is why a majority of people love science so much, and this collective of people who love science so much, is because it does thrive on error. Because we're constantly updated. It's not this one specific thing that says you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa, and that's just the end of it. There's no inherent definitive. Even with some laws that we know in science, people correct them and say, well, maybe not in this particular case. And again, that's what makes science flourish in this case. However, there used to be a comic of what one of my friends shared on Facebook that was talking about the argumentation between people who engage in religious arguments versus people who engage in scientific arguments. And it made people who were religious to be these extremely argumentative, mean people versus scientists are these people with ideas sharing, and they're extremely nice and humble, and they work really well together. And I'm here to tell you that that's not inherently true. I've been to plenty of conferences. I've been to plenty of colloquiums where these particular scientists would get very, very, very mad at each other, and they make arguments a lot. And argumentation is good. I'm not saying that it's not good. And with any argument, you need to have these particular areas that your book talks about a little bit in terms of claim, evidence, and warrant. Claim is that statement that you make. So anytime that you're making a persuasive argument, you need to have a claim, whatever it may be. But to have that claim, you can always have it through, basic emotions or anecdotal evidence that you've seen to support it. But you need that evidence. You need some kind of evidence to determine that, yes, this is the case. So some people may say along these lines of, because I have anecdotal evidence, this is truth. And if you're looking at this from a scientific perspective, this would be a little bit difficult to support. Because although you may have an instance where I don't, if I have 500 people that say yes, and you're one example saying no, well, this is something that needs to be revisited potentially. So another thing we do is, we have this evidence, and so you have a claim and you have evidence. What you need to do in terms of linking these two together is what's called a warrant. And the warrant is basically your credibility for making this evidence. So whether it's you're the researcher yourself or you're borrowing from another person's research, this is why we tell people to cite when you write things. And it's really important to consider because when we cite people, that's giving them that validation of saying what they said is pretty much the truth, or it's the truth as we know it as of right now. And so these verbal claims are really necessary in terms of these three things. And you should always think about that when you're making an argument. Do I have the evidence to support said argument? And do I have a warrant that makes it so? Because otherwise, you're making this maybe based off emotion. You're making this based off anecdotal evidence. That sometimes anecdotal evidence is kind of cool in terms of getting the key started to get the engine running on research. But more times, often than not, it doesn't hold as itself. Just by itself. So one thing we do is. Or one thing that I'll mention in terms of making arguments here is that verbal claims are really hard to grasp. So we get this collective argument and we try to make it so that we can get other people to understand it, and we try to persuade people of our arguments and see what they say and see if they agree or disagree or are apathetic to. But these verbal claims that we're trying to make are difficult to grasp sometimes because of the symbols. It's hard to agree on a definition. So this is why when mathematicians talk, for the most part, not always, it's pretty easy in this regard because the numbers represent something constant. I know what 3 means. I know what I means. I know what a sigma means. I know what pi means. It's constant in this case. So the misinterpretation, there's rarely any misinterpretation in this case because it's such a solid foundation in terms of what this particular symbol means. And this is why, I talked about Aristotle and Plato, but again, there's a researcher by the name of Alan Turing. You may have heard of this person. He's one of the people that was a mathematician, and he helped the United States as well as the Allies win World War II. In terms of breaking code from German U-boats. I'm not 100% sure, don't quote me on that. But it was interesting because his language was more or less code breaking, and it was a very simplified version of playing a series of 21 questions that are yes and no. So if you've ever dabbled or even heard of something that's called binary code, it's basically questions that equal 1 as yes or 0 as no. And this is computer language, and we can program things to understand that in any given circumstance that I communicate with my computer, it's 1 yes, 0 no. And you can do that, and you should try that at some point. If you've ever played 21 questions before, it's always this. 1, we've come to an agreement. 0, we need to revisit something. Or we need to revisit the question. And so if I reach the 1, that means I'm kind of done with that series of questions, and I can move on to the next one to find out what you're trying to say. And this is very simplistic communication. And it's interesting because it still works if you play this kind of yes-no questioning throughout. So again, it's crazy how it works in terms of basically speaking binary to your friends. But not only scientists, but we can also argue a lot too. And claims are hard to make. I keep mentioning this within persuasion, but it's true because, when we get into this notion of claims, it's not just the verbal symbolism that, either one of us may not be able to understand. But we talked last week or a couple weeks ago about availability heuristics. It was 2 weeks ago, the first week. And that when we get into this notion of evidence and warrant, it's hard to find those sources, especially when you want to find an argument that you want to back up. Let's say you've seen an anecdotal example of something, and you want to make that claim strongly towards somebody, and you do your research and you're finding nothing. You're not finding anything that agrees with your opinion, and that's difficult to be able to reconcile. And so, you rely on that anecdotal evidence if you can't have that particular support in this case. So in this case, what you saw is the evidence and you are the warrant because you're the one who saw it. This is kind of a primary research that you're kind of investigating here. Again, I don't inherently support this fully. There are obviously some methods of research, much like survey research, that would allow for something like this. If you're interviewing or focus groups, they would be extremely important, and they are extremely important. But again, always take research with a grain of salt. Because, once you get into the nitty-gritty of it, it can be a little confusing as well. And this is where these availability heuristics come in, and where Carl Sagan would get so mad. So Carl Sagan is a very, very famous scientist, and we get so mad because many of these claims are being formed as a form of pseudoscience. And if you don't know what pseudoscience is, it's basically these statements without the rigor of scientific investigation. And it's the same with Aristotle in terms of an enthymeme. And it's if-then logic. So I don't know if you've heard of if-then logic. There's plenty of people that say if you spank your child, they will. This is the reason that prisons are crowded. This is if-then. If you spank your child, then this is the problem, which is prisons are overcrowded. Now, you might sit there and go, there are a lot of different things that could lead to a correlation in prison overpopulation that may or may not have anything to do with spanking a child. In this case, I'm not going to go too far into that because I don't want to spur a major debate in here. But we must, or you might see these, another example is you might see people that say conclusive evidence, or because of this, then this. It's we must kind of logic. In many cases, conclusive logic is difficult to be able to do because, again, there's so many things that can factor into what is a problem, why does that problem exist. And there's a difference between the area of facts and judgments. You know, a fact could be that you could say it's 96 degrees outside. It's clearly almost February, it's not 96 degrees outside. But you can also say that above 90 degrees is too hot. Where I lived for the past few years, I talked about living in North Dakota, and I would say that anything below 0 is too cold, or if I could say it's 0 degrees. The 0 degrees statement of saying just it's 0 degrees is a fact. Below 0 degrees it's too cold is that judgment in this particular case. And facts are difficult to come by, which is why we need that warrant and the evidence to back it up. So combining those things together make for typically good reason. However, and this is my favorite part, there's also fallacies. So you may have heard of some of these before. The book mentions 6 different types of logical fallacies, and I want to go over some of them. First one they talk about is ad hominem, and it's directed at a person versus an idea. So the first example that comes to mind is there is the notion of speech. One such example, when there's a crisis situation or there is an issue situation, you might have something called categoria. And categoria is an attack towards another person. Now this can be another person in terms of their policy or their character. So in policy, you know, I get this a lot. So I have student evaluations at the end of every year. And if it's an attack towards policy, you don't like my tests, you don't like the way the syllabi is laid out, you don't like the assignments, you know, these are things that I can help. These are things that I can change. And I'm usually pretty open to working with those. Versus attack on character. And I've had a few of these before, you know, where someone might say, I don't like your voice. Or one thing that's, you know, I've gotten before, and now granted I haven't gotten on a student evaluation, but you could say something along the lines of one that's very common, someone's overweight. And it's one of the oldest in the book. To say to somebody if they can't, quote, win an argument is that they go towards their physical appearance. It doesn't have anything to do with any argument, but people use it all the time, which is like, why? You know, my body stature has nothing to do with the arguments that I'm trying to make. But again, people use it all the time. People who engage in vloggers, for instance, people on YouTube who talk about their daily life, some people are like, I don't like your voice. Or I don't like the way you look. Again, nothing to do with the arguments being made. However, these are things that, you know, I can't really change. You know, my voice is what it is. Now, granted, you know, I can change things in terms of my weight, but at the same time, it still, at the current time, doesn't have anything to do with the argument I'm trying to make here. So this is extremely important in terms of if you are talking about an argument, if you are talking about questioning someone's reasoning, you got to go for the actual argument and the actual the ideas instead of the person itself. And I encourage you to do that when you're looking at student evals. If there's a problem, let me know through policy, not necessarily about, the way I appear to you in this case. So that's one. The second one is false cause. This is another one of my favorites. It is one of the biggest ones we see in science, and you'll see this a lot in terms of argumentation. So when people try to persuade you, and you want to think about this quite frequently, is correlation does not inherently equal causality. In fact, we've got two separate tests, whether you do a correlation test or you do a regression test. One is meant for just that, correlations. The other is the second half of it, meant to look at causation. And there are hundreds of them. And here's an easy one. For correlation example, someone could say something, and this is going to sound ridiculous, mind you, but I do want you to hear it out. You could say that ice cream is the most consumed food in summer. You could also make the claim, and that may be true, that may be a fact based on statistics. You may also claim that there are more homicides in the summer months than there are in any other season. I don't know if that's actually true, but if those two are statistically true, they work in a correlation where we say if ice cream sales go up, we could also look at homicide rates go up. Thus, people would make the claim that ice cream causes murder. Which, again, you may sit there and go, that sounds ridiculous. But does it? I mean, when you really step back and think about some of the claims that are made of this cause, X causes Y, you really need to step back and say, I don't know if that is completely true. And this may be also something to look at. I've had friends that would talk about vaccinations and causality with autism and ADHD. And there are definitely correlations that can be drawn from there. But whether or not they cause them is a completely different completely different area. And so these are things we have to think about. And even if there are causal inferences, which is something that I think the FDA posted, although I have never seen this. This is just something someone posted. This will be a good thing for two-step flow. Someone posted that the FDA posted something about causal inference. And even then, that's not inherently causality. That's saying one causes the other. And again, what you believe is what you believe in this case. But again, these are the claims that are being made that you really have to be careful in the language that's being delivered here. And we do this all the time. So that's second. The third one is what's called a non sequitur. A non sequitur, and I believe it's a comic strip, that there are two things that are meant to be together that actually are the opposite of each other. A good example of this is the KFC Susan G. Komen bucket. I wish I had one. One of my former professors who loves researching corporate social responsibility had one of these buckets in her office. And it was to raise awareness for the Susan G. Komen Foundation for Breast Cancer. So, nice, right? Every time a bucket is sold, 10 cents goes to this particular foundation. And you might say, okay, that's awesome. And a lot of people did. In fact, it's the number one CSR initiative or cause-related marketing initiative campaign ever. They've raised more money for breast cancer for buying fried chicken. Well, the only problem is what's the number one cause for heart disease amongst women what's the number one cause of death? I just gave it away. It's heart disease. And so you're eating fried chicken to support research towards breast cancer, whereas what you're doing here is, potentially killing yourself by eating copious amounts of fried chicken. Now, again, correlation, but this is something to take into consideration. I mean, it's almost ironic how non sequiturs work. The funny thing about, if you've ever heard this Alanis Morissette song, Ironic, there's nothing ironic about that song. It just stinks. Everything about the things that she describes in that song, listen to it sometime. They're terrible, and what a bad series of events that a person has to go through. But none of it is ironic. So that's a non sequitur. Okay, so halfway done. The other three aren't as big. When I say not as big, I don't have as much notes for these in general. The other is circular logic, which is just saying something, saying the same thing as part of your reasoning. This comes a lot with people in authority. My parents used to use this a lot when I was younger, is the because I said so. I'm taking out the nature of the evidence and just going straight to the warrant. I don't need any evidence to prove that I'm right. I'm just going to tell you that I said so. I'm the warrant. That's it. And you need that evidence. You always need that evidence to explain the why. However, due to things like authority could be an example of this, amongst plenty of other things, where we go into this circular argument. And if you really listen to some of these persuasive attempts, you might sit there and say, well, I don't know if what you're saying is actually true. Or is it something that you're just kind of trying to not manipulate me, but trying to trick me a little bit into not seeing past the facade of a circular argument. Then there's oversimplification. That's the fifth one. Things that are complex and major explanations are needed. So, these are conversations that I will have about politics, about religion, where people might use euphemisms or analogies. And at some point, I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm beyond the point of euphemisms and analogies. I really want to get into what is it that makes this particular argument what it is. And we do this a lot. We do this a lot in terms of describing things, describing people, that we oversimplify certain things about them, about the things that they do, about the way that they look, and we don't really get to see the individual argument. And that is a major, major problem, to oversimplify things that need total description. So again, think of that in terms of an area of logic that can be very much missed. In fact, it's probably one of the more common ones that I've seen right now. The last one, and this is kind of where I'm running low on time here, where I'll stop. But the last one is talking about bad authority. And the notion of power. I was about to say nation of power. No, the notion of power. And there's plenty of types of power. You can have power by authority. You can have referent power, whatever it may be. But bad authority in this case is basically saying, because, again, I'm pulling a little circular logic out here, because I am the authority, it's true. And you're relying too much on the fact that they may have more experience. In fact, I think it's in Cialdini. I'm not 100% sure. There's an example of, authority is definitely in there, where a person is flying a plane and the person who is talking to the pilot, the main pilot, is basically saying, I might crash. And, through the messages on the black box, the person would say, no, keep this particular speed and velocity. I don't plan to be pretend to be an aeronautical engineer or scientist or anything, so forgive me if I'm not using terms correctly. But this plane ended up crashing just because the person says something's wrong. The other pilots say, no, everything's okay, you're doing it correctly, and based on this authority, they crashed and unfortunately passed because of this. And I'm not saying don't respect elders, but you might disagree and can still respect and admire those people with more power in this case. In fact, authority, and I think Cialdini mentioned this as well. Authority in this case is where the Milgram experiments started. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. The Milgram experiments, basically, in a nutshell, will talk about how this particular scientist, Milgram, mentioned that he was interested in the fact that people in hindsight would say, well, I would never be a Nazi. I would never follow the creed of Adolf Hitler. I would never support them. And he said, well, really, let's see if that's actually true or not, where people would follow what would be called as blind authority. And I won't go into the nitty-gritty details of it. I'd encourage you to look it up because it's really interesting. You can make a huge argument of the ethics of conducting this experiment, but nevertheless, it's super interesting to read about. So, again, check that out if you got the opportunity. The main thing that we always need to consider is going through, if you are making a persuasive argument towards somebody, we always have to consider audience in terms of who we're talking to. So, for example, I have always tried to get my wife to ski. And I've tried to get my wife to do other things that I would like to do with her, and vice versa. She tries to get me to do the same. And one thing I've always noticed is that when I push, like when I say, you really should do this, she pushes back quite a bit. So it's usually when we find this common ground, or if I kind of wait around and show how much fun I'm having with something. Sometimes she comes around the bend and views something or maybe tries something different. And again, it's vice versa. I'm the exact same way. That if my wife wants me to do something, it's really that old saying of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. Same concept. And where we'll push back if you try to force us to. Whereas, if you lead us there and just kind of let us hang out, maybe, we'll actually engage in the activity. So, fingers crossed that I could ever get to ski. I'm just kidding. But again, those claims of audience are major in terms of understanding your audience. But always remember, claim, evidence, warrant in those cases. And that's what makes a foundational argument. So that's basically it for today. Don't forget, I will mention this pretty much every recording that I do. Don't forget your reflection paper. Number 1, definition of persuasion, coercion, and manipulation is going to be due on Friday. So please get to that as soon as possible. I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope it doesn't snow too bad where you are. It's supposed to snow 6 inches where I am, so we'll see what happens. I might do another recording from my house. We'll see. But I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.